All right, so hi again, guys. It's me. So, okay, let's move on to our first lesson. So, hopefully, you guys were able to watch the intro to Opman 120 that I uploaded. So, yeah. All right, so let me just share my screen first. That's a young, right, so YouTube channel. Let's go into the strategy lesson. Okay, so strategy. Honestly, this is probably one of the most important lesson here. So basically, kasi the way I see it, strategy or strategic thinking is how you're gonna approach all the other lessons for Up 912. Okay, so let's start. So strategy. So how do we define strategy? So it's basically a plan of action or policy designated to achieve a major or overall aim. So para sa akin, strategy deals mainly with two things. That is your what and your how. Namely, what pertains to what objectives and goals do I need to have or do I need to set. Next is how. How deals with, okay, what is the best way, best initiative, best action that I can take in order to achieve those goals within certain limits, certain restrictions that I may or may not have. Okay, so basically, let me just move my screen here. This what and this how, these questions can be broken down even further. So what deals mainly with your objectives, your goals. So at the very top, you have your main objective, main goal, main metric. And this main metric is driven by a few key variables. So it can be a few, it can be a lot of variables. So let's see. A good example here is your QPI, actually, your grades. So your QPI is your main objective. The main variables or key drivers here are your different subjects. So if you get an A subject one, A in all of your subjects, then your objectives an A. Your QPI becomes an A. So yeah. So basically, once you have these variables identified, what you need to do is, okay, I have these different you break in them you break these variables or these drivers down even further. So this portion can actually have multiple levels. So parang per variable or per key driver, it can have its own key drivers, own variables. So the question is, when do you stop? You stop when you have a variable in which you can directly influence, which you can directly impact through your initiative. So, which is your how. So, your how is all about creating, okay, if this is my variable, what are the different initiatives and actions that I can do to kind of move this metric to the direction that I want it to go to. So, yeah. What's a good example for this one? So I guess concept, yeah, let's go back to your grades, for example. So on this subject, so what are the key variables in these subjects? So you have your different assessments, your quizzes, your assignments. So these are your different variables. And then how do you exactly approach these assessments or your initiatives, so your study habits. Um, so if you were to make initiatives, maybe you could group study with a partner, test yourself, do you watch YouTube videos, maybe you read the textbook. So these are different initiatives that you can do or you can implement in order to raise your grade to that level in which you want it to be at. So yeah. The, one important factor or portion of when it comes to your initiatives is that it's not set in stone. You have to remember that when it comes to coming up with initiatives, it's important to have a list and to have a lot of different options, because you never really know which initiative will work or won't work. So yeah, even if you do a lot of research, it's always just an approximation. Yeah. So you have to test out these different initiatives quickly and effectively. So by testing it out, meaning you create a very defined success metric. So what does this mean? So if this initiative does not increase my grade by a factor of X, then it means it's a failure. I'm not gonna keep doing that. I'm gonna do something else. So yeah, so this is an example of how that iterative thinking works. So yeah, this is also very related to what I actually mentioned in the course outline, intro to Open 120. So yeah, so we can, so basically, I will be teaching you guys a framework, a step-by-step process in a way to actually come up with your own strategy. For this portion, your objectives and your key drivers, your main tasks are really to define, deconstruct, and then to prioritize. So prioritize is really more of looking at which subjects actually are the biggest drivers or have the biggest influence or impact on my main objective. So once after this, it's how should I achieve these objectives. So it's all about planning. So setting up how exactly you want to tackle it, implementing, basically just doing it and learning. So realizing, okay, what went wrong, what went right, how do I do more of what went right, and how do I do less of what went wrong. So that's basically the framework in which we will be um, discussing strategy. So yeah. Okay. So one one cool thing about the strategic framework that I'm about to teach you guys is that it's actually very, very uh, prominent. I guess you can see it in a lot of different fields. So you can see it from startups. So we have the build, measure, learn cycle from the Lean Startup book by Eric Rice. So a great book if you guys want to read it. Next is also, we have even in the realm of theology. So I'm not sure if you guys have taken up Theo 151, but if you have, there's this specific topic, or basically the framework in which Theo 151 is crafted, is called the pastoral cycle. So this pastoral cycle is all about experience, analysis, reflection, and then action. So it's all about first immersing yourself into the problem, defining what is the problem, and then analyzing whatever data you have, reflecting, basically analysis, and then action. And you keep doing these different initiatives, these different tasks, in the hopes of solving that problem or achieving that specific objective. Another field in which this is very relevant is science. We have the scientific method. If you look closely, the scientific method is very similar. So you ask a question, define, do background research, construct a hypothesis. So this is your planning phase. You're planning your initiative. Your initiative is basically a hypothesis. And when you're creating a hypothesis, you have this success metric, which will tell you um, very, very concretely whether or not your hypothesis is accepted or rejected. So the same with strategy. You need a success metric or to design an experiment in such a way na alam mo agad kung effective siya or hindi effective. There has to be a very distinct line that if it's on the right side of that line, it's good. If it's on the left side, it's not. There's no gray area. Hindi pwede, pwede na. I mean, it's very concrete in a sense. So yeah, so this is a cool thing about this framework of this strategic framework. So yeah, so let's go deeper as to what these things mean. So there we have here. So the first step is the objectives that we need. What objectives should we accomplish? So the first thing that we have to do is we have to define it. So when we define it, so it has to be specific. So what does this mean? So it means that it leaves no gray area, as I've mentioned before. So the question of whether you were able to achieve the goal or not should be a yes or no question. So kung ano sabihin natin, your goal is I want to be healthy versus a goal of I want to lose 5 pounds. So pag sinabi mo I want to be healthy, medyo it's kind of clear. What is healthy? How do you define what a healthy person is? So you can define it by their weight, by their, I don't know, blood test, cholesterol or whatever. So once you break down that very vague goal of being healthy into these specific metrics, then it becomes a lot more clear if you have been able to achieve it or accomplish it or not. So one good example of defining your objectives, where it's really most important, is when you're learning. For example, you're trying to learn a new skill. Programming, you're trying to learn how to do JavaScript. So a lot of times we will put our goal as learning JavaScript, simple as that. But the problem with defining that goal in such a way is that hindi mo naman talaga alam kung marunong ka na ng JavaScript or not. So what constitutes knowing how to do JavaScript, diba? How do you tell objectively, the actual objective, whether or not you were able to learn JavaScript? So one way you can do this is by defining, okay, what exactly about JavaScript do I need to learn? Do I need to learn how to do automate this specific task, do this specific project? So once you're able to kind of define it in that way, it's a lot easier to kind of achieve that objective or that goal. So once you're not learning JavaScript, what you can do is your goal is, okay, I want to be able to do project 1, project 2, project 3. If I'm able to do these projects, then I can consider myself a master at JavaScript. So parang ganun. Okay. So yeah, that's basically one application of this. Next is, when should you be able to accomplish this goal? So a time frame is also very important. So a goal can basically always be achieved if your time frame is like forever, right? So what's important is that you're able to achieve these goals in a specific time frame that is relevant for you. So yeah. So when setting your objective, it might be good to continually ask yourself why. So kung ano sabihin natin, why or what does it look like? These are good questions to ask yourself. So being healthy. So why do I want to be healthy? So you kind of get deeper to that sense. Or a better example would be JavaScript programming. Why do I want to learn JavaScript? Why do I want to learn programming? Is it because I want to automate things? Is it because I want to make a website? So by asking yourself why, you get closer and closer to your true objective, your true goal. With regards to the second question, what does parang blank look like exactly? So what does learning JavaScript look like exactly? What does learning Photoshop look like exactly? So yeah, these are some good guide questions that you should ask yourself when you're defining your goal. Okay, so what are some examples of well-defined goals? First example, a business-related example, to grow the company as measured by revenue. So this is your metric by January 1. So of course, it'll be a lot, you can add, the exact revenue target. So grow the company by, as measured by revenue, by 10%. So grow your revenue by 10%. So it's very, very clear. So if that was 9.99, medyo, alam mo yun, it's close, pero you didn't really achieve that objective. So yeah, parang ganun. Next is to lose 5% of body fat percentage by June 30, 2021. Next is to get users to high-profile content in 3 clicks or less by December 3, 2021. So mainly objectives can be categorized in 2 ways. I would say. So the first one is para siyang number based. So para it's a specific metric. Yes. So 5% body fat is a specific metric. Revenue is a specific metric. The second type of objective is more of a task. So accomplish it or not accomplish it. So do this project or it doesn't do this project. Or have a checklist with these specific criteria ng project na yan. And if it checks everything on this criteria, then it passes. So these are the types of objectives that you have to take note of. So next, after you define exactly what your metric is, define exactly what success looks like, it's time to deconstruct what are the different variables that could affect this specific variable. So how do you do this exactly? So first thing you have to do is research what variables affect your objective. For example, weight loss. What affects weight loss? So calories, exercise, diet. So these are different variables. So list down different variables that could potentially affect your objective metric, whether directly or indirectly. So it's also important to look at indirect factors, because you can break these down further to kind of have your to find and identify which tasks you can do to directly influence this, if that makes sense. So the next question is, how do you measure these variables? So a lot of times we can be very vague with our measures, with our objectives. So this pertains also to the defined portion, that a good objective is usually a measurable objective. It's quantitative. It has a number. It's numeric. So what is the one metric that matters? So this is usually a combination of quantity and quality. So a good parang way to do that is make it a ratio, make it a rate. So what this means is that kung ano sabihin natin your goal is quantity. So kung ano sabihin natin gusto mo ng maraming attendees to your event. So yeah, actually, if your only goal was the number of attendees to your event, they literally invite anybody, everybody, even give them free food. I could probably have 100 people, 1,000 people. Diba? Pero you have to kind of complement this with a quantity variable, a quality variable, sorry. So that quality has to be a specific criterion. So parang, what percent, that's a rate, that's a ratio of your visitors is qualified. Your target market are students, so parang what a quantity, so you have 100 students who fit this criteria. So parang that makes sense. Feel free to ask any questions in like the discussion or the replies. So yeah. So next is what steps, tasks need to be accomplished in order to achieve this specific objective. So one good way, one exercise you can do is visualize accomplishing this goal. Okay, what does this look like? So what does sabihin natin your goal is make your website clean. Make your design cleaner. So what does a clean design look like? What does a good website? What does a good website look like? So what are different variables in a place? Like how would you be able to tell which one is which? So if you were given a bad website and a good website, how would you be able to tell objectively which one is better, which one is worse? So yeah, that's basically how you deconstruct. Next is prioritize. So prioritizing mainly pertains to because usually when you have an objective, you deconstruct it to its different variables. You can have a lot of different variables. A lot of things affect a lot of other things. That's just how the world works. So what you have to do is you have to prioritize which specific variables have the most impact and that I have the most control of, so that your effort is a lot more effective and a lot more efficient in achieving that objective. So from the variables that you have identified, which can you affect directly? Which of these variables have an unequal effect of the objective? So have the biggest share of the impact. Next is if you can only choose one variable to focus on, which variable would that be? So this is a good question to ask yourself, so that you will be you'll be able to prioritize better. So another good question is if you had to accomplish the specific objective in the tenth of the time, how would you do that exactly? If you needed to achieve your 5-year plan in like 5 months, 6 months, 6 months, to be exact. How would you do that? So what would you take out? What would you do exactly? It's a good way to prioritize. Okay, so now moving on to the how. So we discussed the what part, or identifying what objectives I should have. Next is the how. So how are we going to achieve these objectives? So next is what are the specific initiatives that I can do in order to accomplish the identified variable? So what are the direct tasks I can do? Next, who are the best people in order to accomplish these tasks? So, okay. So parang who will be in the business context where you're working with a team, which departments will be the best to assign to this specific objective? Or in your group, which member is the best to kind of do this? Because you give the design work, the PowerPoint work, guy who's really good at marketing, really good at design. Next is how long will it take in order to accomplish these tasks? So these are things your time frame. So are there any additional pieces of information that I need to know in order for me to tackle this objective better? So this is also part of your planning. You have to take these into consideration. Another part of planning. So if we were related to science, this is your experiment part. So any good experiment, basically you will have as I've mentioned before, a success metric to know that whether or not this objective works or it doesn't work. So that's something that you have to kind of put in your plan. Next is implement. So it's all about doing it. Basically, that's what implement means. How can I start implementing these plans as soon as possible? How can I start implementing the plan as soon as possible? How do I effectively test whether or not my initiatives will affect my variables in the way that I want them to? What's the easiest way for me to start implementing? What are the biggest time wasters that keep me from going out and implementing? So basically, what I want to say here is that when you're creating your strategy, you have to spend parang a lot less of it on um, the research portion, and a lot more of it on the implementation portion. So, kasi what usually happens is what I guess you'll realize eventually, when you're doing, I don't know, business or even corporate or even in your life in general, is that you never really know what's gonna happen. I mean, a lot of these experts can tell you what's probably gonna happen, but honestly, they don't really know, diba? So parang, so you're testing a product. You want to sell, a new phone. A lot, a lot of the experts might tell you that's not gonna work. It sucks. They're probably right, but they may be right. Pero honestly, at the end of the day, they still don't know unless you actually go out and test it. Unless you go out and actually ask people whether they would buy that product or not. So actually, a lot of the startups, a lot of the famous startups were rejected by a lot of different investors. So, I mean, no one really knows what's gonna happen. So the only way that you can know for sure is to actually go out and try it, go out and implement it. So next is learn. So after implementing, what's important is that you learn. So learning, again, as I've mentioned before, is characterized by action and characterized by result. So in order to learn, you have to go back at your plan and look at, okay, what works and what doesn't work. How can I do more of what works, double down on what's working most effectively? So yeah. So what are your biggest mistakes? What are your biggest time wasters? What had no effect at all, but I spent the most of my time doing it. So this is all about learning, about that continuous process, that cycle of getting better and better. So the faster you go through this, the faster and the more you go through the cycle, the better you get at achieving that specific objective. So yeah. So yeah. Let me. So yeah. So next in the next video, we'll deep dive exactly on business strategy. We'll try to break that down further, and we'll also discuss different examples of applying strategy.